chair a little bit, Justin. Sorry about that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let the record show that today is September the 16th. The time is 7 p.m., and we will now call the Amherst County Board of Supervisors meeting to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Adams. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. I will now lead us in the invocation. Please remove your hats if you have one. And then Mr. Wade will lead us in the pledge. Please rise. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for the privilege of being able to meet here as a public body to do the work that the citizens elected us to do. Lord, thank you for our SROs who work tirelessly to keep our students safe, and thank you for our Sheriff's Department who do the same for all of our community. Lord, as a nation, we grieved over the senseless murder of Charlie Kirk. If nothing else, Lord, please help us remember that we don't have to agree with each other, but we should always react with love in our heart and not hate. And Lord, thank you to all of our citizens and staff who look out for all of the rest of us. And in your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Attention, salute, pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. All righty. We will now move on to citizen comments. And we have Mr. Dylan Taylor. Mr. Taylor, how are you?
Good evening. My name is Dylan Taylor. I'm from Petersburg, Virginia, but I am here to speak on behalf of the battery storage ordinance for tonight. I'm a member of Energy Right, an educational nonprofit that aims at helping localities and their citizens navigate the clean energy landscape. Battery storage has become a vital piece of the puzzle in the ever-changing landscape of energy demand. As we continue to transition to renewable energy resources, storage solutions will play a critical role in ensuring reliability and flexibility, capturing energy when it's abundant and delivering when it's needed most. One of the most appealing aspects of battery storage is the size of the facilities themselves. Unlike solar, which often requires large tracts of lands, BESS projects can be implemented on a much smaller scale. This makes them ideal for Amherst County, where maintaining the rural character and preserving open spaces are important priorities. BESS also plays a critical role in grid balancing, addressing energy voltage and frequency stability. By integrating BESS, counties can reduce reliance on fossil fuel-based peaker plants, which are costly and environmentally taxing. Instead, BESS enables renewable energy resources like solar and wind to be utilized more efficiently, ensuring clean energy flows into the grid. The only area that we'd like to see changed or implemented would be allowed for an exception of BESS projects in agricultural zones. If a project were to meet and exceed the standards and conditions set forth by the Board and Planning Commission, then a pathway to such an exception should be encouraged. Another reason as to why battery storage can be implemented in agricultural areas is that they do not require new transmission lines, and their interconnection utility aspects can be done relatively easily without with minimal impact on the land. I urge the county to continue working towards a more reliable and renewable future in energy. Myself and the Energy Right team are more than happy to be a resource for you guys and the citizens. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. All right, next we have Mr. Bob Fenner. Mr. Fenner, just give us your name and address, please, or district. You don't have to give us your address.
Bob Fenner, 1011 Swapping Camp Road, Amherst, Virginia, Jeremy. I'm here to discuss the proposed idea of having a battery storage facility in Amherst. Like the two other firefighters on your panel, we had to look at about 6 hours of exploding batteries. My background was in solar energy. I was on the commission for the state regarding wind energy. I was a planning commissioner. I was an environmental advocate and litigator. I'm pretty open-minded about all of this, but what I would want to stress is I think you might want to do it on a case-by-case basis, because the case for, well, I'll say, everything refers back to Moss Landing, which was the largest battery facility in the United States, and it burned up, and firefighters know you're not going to put these out, which is fine, but they had to evacuate 1,700 people. And so what is the cost of that? So we might want to be wise instead of just saying based on certain zoning regulations, because it's one thing to put another industrial, item in the park that's, compatible, like next to Glad, for example. Something that's going to burn this hot, you may want to get further away from people. The other thought I had is when I was a planning commissioner, one of the first projects I worked on was trying to figure out in the Roseland mining district, which is Piney River, what they took out of the ground. It was a titanium deposit that went back to the 40s. It was a commodity that was protected secrecy-wise in World War II. You can pull numbers on how many train cars they did and try and back out numbers. But the point I would make is they made $1 million, hypothetically, and they've spent $12 million on mitigation. So we need to think about this for future purposes. In about 5 years, supposedly the Chinese will have a new kind of battery, way less prone to runaway burning up. But as the industry stands now, what the issue is the manufacturers say, we make 10 million of these in a row. By the time we find an error, if you have 1,000 defective batteries out there, that's enough. And as I said, we've been watching hours and hours of these garages blowing up, backpacks lighting on fire. This is a serious environmental issue, and it's the wave of the future, but we got to be wise how we look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fenner. Next, we have Mr. John Marks.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board and staff. My name is John A. Marks, Jr., and I reside in District 5. Let me preface my comments by saying they should not be interpreted as opposition or approval of the construction of a public safety station into a more populated area of the county. As a matter of fact, some people may recall that approximately 10 years ago, give or take a couple of years, along with Mr. Don Kidd, another supervisor, he and I promoted this idea. However, at that time, the situation did not work out. So my comments here are very simply a word of, let's say, caution. On page 5 and 9 of the Davenport presentation, which I believe does a great job of making this presentation, there is a footnote which states, does not include debt service on the Amherst County Service Authority's 2023 B Bond Gateway project. However, the Board of Supervisors has committed to paying the debt service on the $2.5 million long-term Gateway loan with the anticipation that the Service Authority revenue from the project will support the long-term debt service. And if not, the county will provide for any shortfall. This commitment is clearly set forth in resolution number 2023-R-5 and the support agreement, which states, and I will quote, if at any time revenues are insufficient are expected to be insufficient to make any of the payments referred to in paragraph 3 hereof, Amherst County Service Authority shall notify the county administrator of the amount of such insufficiency, and the county administrator shall request a supplemental appropriation from the board in the amount necessary to make such payment, end of quote. Okay. The long-term loan for the $2.5 million is to be in place by March the 1st of 2026. And that debt service obviously will have to include principal and interest. We paid interest in 24, 25, and 26, so now we're going to the long-term loan, okay? It seems obvious, to me anyway, that for some time the county will be paying the debt service for the $2.5 million Service Authority loan. How long and how much, nobody knows. We don't even have a schedule now. I would like to recommend that the county request Davenport to add 2.5 years of debt service for this $2.5 million loan to be paid for by the county and to reflect this number in the numbers on page, I picked the one payment plan that I thought would probably be the one that would be selected. Page 20 of the Davenport reflecting debt service after the public safety project. This assumes the Gateway project will be well along and Service Authority revenue will support the debt after 2.5 years. I believe this would provide a complete analysis of the actual debt service that will be required. That $2.5 million debt is not in the Service Authority, and it's nowhere now. So anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak? Seeing and hearing none, we will now close citizen comment and move on to the public hearing. Mr. Creasy?
Madam Chair, Board, good to see you all tonight. This ordinance, number 2025-1, is relating to energy storage facilities or battery storage facilities, as they're commonly known as. The ordinance before you is the same ordinance that was before you at your first read. However, there is one slight typo that I must allude you to. It's on page 2, in which it indicates the setback for the storage facility should be 150 feet. This is what is published in your agenda. That should be 75 feet. Staff apologizes for that mistake. The rest of this ordinance is what you saw before you at your first read in September. Staff is not planning to go through the ordinance with you all. Some high-level things. The ordinance includes a decommissioning plan, a base soil test at the beginning of a project in case it needs to be decommissioned afterwards, things relating to fire safety regarding emergency response plans, things of that nature, and that it would only be allowed as a special exception in our M1 industrial district, which means that they would have to go before the Planning Commission and you all as a board on a case-by-case basis to determine if that is adequate with the community comprehensive plan and the surrounding area for approval. And with that, do you guys have any questions for staff?
I do. I've got one for the attorney. Is there any legal problem with the fact that what was written and what's in the packet is different?
No, ma'am, it's not a substantial.
Not material? Okay.
Not material change.
All right, thank you. Board members, any questions?
Not right now.
All right. We will now open up the public hearing on ordinance 2025-1, energy storage facilities. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor of? Anyone here wishing, hearing once, going twice? Anyone here wishing to speak opposed to? Seeing and hearing none, we will now close the public hearing. Board members, any questions of staff? Is there a
Madam Chair, the only thing is, and this is going back to what Mr. Creasy just alluded to, and I just wanted some clarification, because I know doubling that setback that's quite a bit, but what is there a reason why we went with 75 versus the 150?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great question. So staff originally proposed a 150-foot setback. That's why that was in here when it went to Planning Commission a few months ago. So staff does apologize for that typo. When discussing with the with Planning Commission, they decided to change that to 75 feet. They believed 150 was too much for that use, as I don't want to give you all the reasons. I can't speak specifically from mind, but they believed it was too stringent, especially for the industrial area. When it was first brought to the commission, it was discussed to make this a special exception in not only our industrial area, but also our A1 district. And so that's why 150 feet was originally proposed. When the A1 district was struck out of this ordinance, that's when that communication started happening with the Planning Commission. They decided to reduce it to 75. And it's important to note, in the industrial area, let's say you've got an industrial site and right next door is another industrial site, and they just share a property line. There's technically no setback in between those two property lines for a warehouse, right? So this is a little more stringent than our typical M1 district. However, we felt as if 150 feet, or the commission did, was too stringent for specifically our industrial area.
No, go ahead.
So, Mr. Creasy, you might not be able to answer this. So how does the building code look at these types of facilities?
NFPA, oh, what's that number, 855, they'll go through that, National Fire Protection, and meet those codes. Other than that, I couldn't tell you specifics. I know they'll have to, of course, submit plans to our building official. We'll have to go through a review process. He'll go back and forth with them. We'll involve the county's fire marshal as well as fire and EMS. They'll have to give the approval before that building permit can be issued.
I guess what I'm alluding to is you mentioned 75 feet from the nearest lot line or parcel not under common ownership. So that's all property lines, right?
Correct.
Front, is there a front yard setback?
Yeah, it's typically, it would either be 50 from the front or 75 from center if it's fee simple or prescriptive.
Okay, so what I'm alluding to is typically on you've got a side yard, you can have this facility 75 feet from an adjacent building that could be 0. So it could be 75 feet theoretically from
Correct.
from another building.
Yes, sir.
All right, and I think what Mr. Fenner was alluding to is that if one of these things do run away and they catch on fire, you're not really going to put it out, right?
Right.
So what kind of exposure issues might we have?
Right. I can't answer that right now. I would say that's a case-by-case basis, and that's why it would be a public hearing. They would have to submit that conceptual plan, and then it would be up to you all as a board and the commission to determine if that use is compatible with the ordinance and surrounding area and what effect it would have on the adjoining building. I think a lot of things come into play. What is in that building, what the use is, the batteries being proposed. There's a lot of things, and I'm unfortunately unable to answer that.
I understand. Yep.
Madam Chair, I got a couple other things just to kind of play off of what Mr. Martin and I have already addressed. So, and I'm coming at this from a public safety standpoint, because in my mind, that's our primary concern dealing with this ordinance, right? I think that's the primary concern that comes to anybody's mind when we're dealing with this. But I want to make sure I'm asking all the right questions. So that setback from the highway, from any access point, so explain that to me. That would still be the 75 foot, is that correct?
Correct. So right now in the M1 district, let's say it was fee simple, meaning that lot did not own to the center line of the road, but they owned to the right-of-way line. They would have a 50-foot setback for a warehouse building. If battery storage proposed, they have to meet 75 feet from that property line no matter what. So it's an additional 25 feet.
So that's, I think from a public safety standpoint, and I know Chief Beam and his team has reviewed this, but I know I get in the weeds a little bit too much sometimes, but thinking about accessibility in the event that something was to happen with one of these pods, right? do we have an adequate amount of space from an access point to be able to get the recommended equipment to be able to mitigate the incident?
Yeah, that's a great-
Because as Mr. Martin said,
Right.
this is a long-term, this is nothing that's going to be immediate as far as mitigating incident. It's going to be long-term, basically protecting in place. But making sure that we're doing our due diligence from the county side to allow for plenty of ingress and egress for response apparatus. That's what I want to make sure that we're not going to,
Yes, sir.
we're going to back ourselves in a corner on, no pun intended.
Yes, sir. That's a great comment, and what I would say to that, there's a few things that would come into mind. One, the ordinance requires automatic shutdown systems for each battery pod. That's a good thing for public safety. The other one is they have to come up with an emergency response plan, which must be approved by fire and EMS. In that, I would hope that that's when that kind of information is going to be worked out. In addition to that, this type of use would require a major site plan, which goes before our developmental review committee, in which fire and EMS, the fire marshal, they're all part of, and that's when we get their initial design. And so, for example, the best example I could give you would be the Madison Heights Town Center and the means of ingress, egress. Well, they first proposed it with curbs that you couldn't go over, so their trucks could not get in there. That initial meeting, we were able to figure that out, and we were able to get that alleviated. I would assume that that would be the exact same process for this to ensure that fire apparatus is able to access the site safely and put out or contain whatever needs to be contained.
Okay. So in the event, again, being a special exception, so all of them have to come before us. If a site plan is put before us, then are we allowed, and please excuse my lack of knowledge on this, but are we allowed to strengthen those setbacks based on what the site plan shows?
Mr. Popovich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if you could increase a setback with a condition. You maybe could.
I mean, obviously, if it's voluntarily agreed to as a condition, sure, but I think if you set it by ordinance, that's the required, that's what needs to be met. It's anything further or beyond that would simply be voluntarily agreed to by the property owner, but you can't force it per se.
Or, I'm sorry, Mr.
No, go ahead.
Or you could change the language where you would say setbacks for any storage facilities shall be 75 or 150 feet from the nearest lot line, or as determined by the board during approval. So it gives the board an opportunity to,
Sure, if you loosen up the language a bit and gives you a little bit more latitude, that certainly would work.
well, I think that, I'm sorry, Mr.
No.
I think that we're kind of easing our way into these things, right? We have one that may want to locate in the county. It happens to be in my fire department's response area. So there's a couple of concerns I have. One is setbacks from existing or even proposed buildings in the district and what effect it could have on. Water supply, how much water does it really take to, deal with one of these? When is that emergency response plan submitted?
That would be submitted if it was approved for a special exception and that major site plan takes place during the initial part of their site plan, that's when that would be submitted and reviewed.
Right, and I think that emergency response plan, or at least a big part of it, should be done when it comes to the
Before you
board
all?
for approval.
And I would say that could be an easy change, Supervisor Martin, where we indicate application requirements for a special exception. That could be easily something that we could take that and move it.
That's just my opinion. You got
Yes, sir.
four of them. How many? 1, 2, 3 other board members.
Well, my question is, right now it says 75, but then, Mr. Popovich, to your point, or as determined by the Board of Supervisors on a case-by-case basis, could you leave it at 75 and still put that additional language in there? Would that give you the latitude you're looking for?
As long as there's an or,
Yeah,
I think that would be sufficient, yes.
yeah.
I would be fine with it.
Yeah, I would prefer some language that gives us some latitude to make those decisions once we get the site plan and the ERP.
I could certainly work with Mr. Creasy to come up with some appropriate language.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I may. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and this is nothing dealing with specifically with the battery storage area itself, but more under 925.07 when it comes to revenue sharing. And again, because I don't know enough about it. So the revenue sharing, and I'm sorry if I'm going to bore anybody, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. The revenue sharing parameters, and I'm not sure, Mr. Creasy, if this is you or do we need to defer it to Mr. Popovich, but are those parameters set forth and there's no latitude in the revenue sharing numbers? Is that what we're bound to, or?
So, Mr. Popovich, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would like to say that the rate in which it is taxed, the $1,400 per megawatt that increases every 5 years by 10% is set in stone. That said, there is that thing called a siting agreement in which those numbers could change depending on the negotiations between the county and the developer, in which they could be increased either way.
Okay.
So, Mr. Adams, if I may, I'm a
Sure.
firm believer in the siting agreements and revenue
Absolutely.
sharing for
Yes.
this point, because if energy storage facility company A comes in and builds it, right, and we don't enter into this, and then they sell it to AEP, who's regulated by State Corporation Commission, guess what? It's going to be taxed under the SCC levels, right, which is way significantly lower.
Sure.
If this is in place, that's how it's
Okay.
done for the rest of it.
And that's
So-
what I wanted to make sure of.
And I believe that's why the General Assembly put this in here, is to protect localities from that. So, but all those percentages and years, that's all state code.
Okay. And Madam Chair, last but not least, I think, because I've been trying to scan while I listened to Mr. Creasy, but I read last night, which I have brought up in previous meetings when we've addressed these things, and it also applies to the solar ordinance as well, but this may be under the comprehensive plan, and Mr. Creasy, correct me if I'm wrong, the language that we have discussed before, as far as basically promoting these east of 29, is that in here, or have I missed it in here, or is that in the comprehensive plan?
Right, that is in the comprehensive plan, that is not in the ordinance.
Okay, well, I'll save my comments until then.
And Madam Chair, if I may, with what the board discussed, staff would actually recommend if you all table this, and staff bring the ordinance back to you next month with a more clean version of the things that you all have talked about for approval. That would be staff's recommendation.
Sounds prudent.
But I'll go on record as saying I could support it with the changes that we've discussed. I will not support it loosening it up to do agriculture districts.
Correct, yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Same here.
But
Yes, sir.
that's where I'm at. So if y'all are okay, I'd make a motion to table.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Martin. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion is tabled. Thank you, Mr. Creasy. Next, we've got the comprehensive plan, also you.
Yes, ma'am, and I believe you would, we've made the change at the first read. So at the first read, you all directed staff to include in the industrial district. So our comprehensive plan language reads as follows for energy storage facilities. Promote energy storage facilities in our M1 industrial district and our east of Route 29 and 29 business, and in areas that do not have a negative impact on adjoining property, natural resources, or Amherst County residents. That change has been reflected to include the industrial district. And what this does is it sets a guideline or I would say a picture for developers when they're looking in Amherst County for where to find these sites. Because they'll have to go through our comprehensive plan review, a 15.2 review in which the Planning Commission hears. Now, if the Planning Commission recommends denial of that, they can appeal the Planning Commission decision, and that will come before you, just like the solar special exception last month. This indicates that we'd like to see them east of 29. However, that's not to say if there is a spot that is west of 29 that does not have a negative impact on natural resources, Amherst County residents or adjoining property, you all and the commission still have the ability, they have the ability to recommend approval to you all, and you all still have that ability to approve a site west of 29. This is kind of just a guiding light for our comprehensive plan, our 15.2 review for our commission, and of course, you all as well.
I understand what you're saying, but, or yet, I think we're being very specific in the comp plan, and it would be, we're saying in industrial districts east of 29.
Sir.
Right, so it would be, I mean, I couldn't fathom that the board would come back and say, okay, well, yeah, let's put it west of 29. I mean, our comp plan is our guide. It should be what we use to make land use decisions, so I wouldn't promote that way of thinking, but, yeah, I think I'm okay with the language the way it is.
Any other questions?
So you, Madam Chair, so, Mr. Martin, so you're okay with you're okay with the way it reads, that we're still gonna promote it east of 29, but we have the latitude to go west of 29?
Well, the comp plan is a guiding document.
I understand.
And yes, but, I mean, you can always go against the comp plan. It's not advisable, especially as a planner, but, I think this is about as strict as you're gonna be able to make it, personally, but.
I think from a perception standpoint, and this is what I'd brought up before, and I mean, I am definitely open for somebody to convince me otherwise. And again, my district is west of 29, but still, from a perception standpoint, I just don't like that east of 29 language. If I was a resident east of 29 and that was the focus, that's probably not gonna sit too well with me. Am I looking, please, somebody call me out if I am. I think from a perception standpoint, from a resident who pays taxes in the county, it wouldn't lie well at my feet.
Have we had any, has anybody voiced concerns that, does
Well,
anyone know of?
but we also haven't, I mean, obviously, we haven't had one of these come before us yet. Obviously, we have some industrial districts east of 29, but then, hey, look, what did we just do at our meeting last month when we approved the funds for the Diller track, which is gonna be west of 29, which obviously we're gonna promote, correct, with the economic development. That's the only thing I'm not saying I'd vote against that. That's just kind of my only thing as far as the language that I'm a little hung up on.
So you would, I'm sorry, so you would be okay in any industrial district in the county?
Well, I think that's why the industrial districts were formed,
That's fair enough.
right? Obviously, we're not gonna promote these things in the A1 district, right? Or really, probably any other district, other than an industrial setting. And I think that limits us in itself.
So would you be okay striking in or east of Route 29 and 29 business
Yes,
to say facilities in M1 industrial districts and in areas that do not have a negative impact on adjoining property?
I would.
Okay, that's fair
Would,
enough.
would
I
you
like- I
also
like
want to
that.
strike it for the solar language?
I mean, in my opinion, obviously, I'm not sure, and we may have to defer to Mr. Creasy and Mr. Popovich on this. I'm not sure if we can address that now, if that's
I-
something
I
we need to
know.
bring
I'm
back,
just-
but,
I'm just
but
bringing
yeah,
it up,
I think
so.
I would, Mr. Wade.
Well,
But,
we need to talk about that
Okay.
because solar is allowed in agricultural districts.
well, and you're right, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so I wouldn't.
But I'm not ready to address that right now. This right here,
Why don't we take this one step at a time?
yeah, I mean, and I don't mind making the motion to approve, the change in the comprehensive plan with the amendment on, page 1, under strategies, to remove, Mr. Martin, I probably should let you do this.
And our east of
Yeah,
Route
and
29.
are east of Route 29 and 29 business. That's my only requested change. So I'd make a motion, we approve it with those changes.
We haven't done the public hearing yet, have we?
Oh, no.
Oh, no, we haven't,
Yeah,
sorry.
we gotta, yeah,
Yeah,
so
we-
let's just.
Man, I'm
yeah,
putting the
let's
cart
put a-
before the horse
Let's
here.
just put a pin in that for a minute.
All right,
Okay.
let's put a big pin in it.
Save that.
All right, is there any further discussion? I'll open up the public hearing.
Yeah.
All right, we will now open up the public hearing for Amherst County Comprehensive Plan update. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor of? Hearing none, anyone wishing to speak opposed to? Hearing none, we will now close the comprehensive plan update. Mr. Adams, you can remove your pen.
So let me repeat this. Sorry about that from a process standpoint. So I'll make a motion to approve the language in the comprehensive plan with the amendment in strategies, next to last paragraph, where we will remove the language that says "and are east of Route 29 and 29 business."
All right, motion on the floor by Mr. Adams. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair.
No worries. And we need to know that item C, special exception 2025-136 has been tabled, which brings us to ordinance 2025-4, wild or exotic animals, and we have a representative from the Sheriff's Department here. Good to see you.
Yes, I have been working on my name's Deputy Aguirre, I'm with Amherst County Sheriff's Office Animal Control Division, of those who don't know me. I've been working on this wild exotic animal ordinance, because we are seeing more wild animals and exotic animals and venomous snakes coming into the area. And there's several reasons why I wanted to do this: for our safety, fire and rescue, and then if something, because there are 2 houses in Amherst County that do have venomous snakes in them. And if we have to respond there in an emergency, rescue needs to know that they're there and know what they're going to be dealing with as well. But that's where I'm at. I don't know if y'all have a copy of this.
We do, we've read
Y'all
it, we've
do?
reviewed it, yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add that,
I did have an application made up to where it's gonna be online if this is approved. And there's the fee for all that, which that would obviously go to the county. And I know it's gonna be a lot more work for me, but I'm willing to do that in order to keep everybody safe and these animals in the correct confinement that they need to be in.
okay. Board members, do you have any questions of Deputy Aguirre?
Quick question. So you're gonna create this registry of wild exotic animals. How does that information get conveyed to our fire and EMS personnel?
It would go into, I would notify dispatch or work with somebody that has authority to go with there, which I would tell dispatch what houses have what, like they already know about the 2 houses that have the venomous snakes in them. But like the wild animals or whatever, I could let them know, hey, this address has wild animals. Like we do dangerous dogs. That's what I let them know, hey, there's a dangerous dog here. The judge is, that dog's dangerous, to let everybody know if they respond there to be careful. Things like that. That's what we'd do, communicate with dispatch, so it'd be flagged on that address.
It goes in what's called a premise, so when the address comes up, dispatch would see that there's these exotic, dangerous whatever, and they would relay that to the responding unit.
Okay, I just wanna make sure that
That's how that
information's
would
being
work.
conveyed. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions?
Only a comment that I appreciated being a past public safety person, because that's probably the scariest I've ever been. I've had weapons pulled on me in my career, but the scariest I've ever been is running into a python at a structure fire in Lynchburg. Yeah, not a good feeling.
I agree. I get
Yeah.
a snake call, my adrenaline goes sky high. I'm like, "Ah," but you gotta go.
I want to call somebody when I see a snake at home. I don't do snakes, for the record.
But that's where I stand, and I'm hoping this gets approved. And like I said, I know it's gonna be a lot of work, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice and keep everybody safe.
We appreciate your work on this, we certainly do. I don't think we have any further questions, so thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank you for your time.
All right, board members, we will now open up the public hearing section. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak opposed? Hearing and seeing none, we will now close the public hearing. Board members, what's your pleasure?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve ordinance 2025-4 as presented.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Wade. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you. All right, moving on to consent agenda. Any questions?
Madam Chair, the only question I had was under the appropriation from the fine revenue. So, Mr. Bryant, is the Sheriff Ayers' financial person report to us on a monthly basis as far as what the balances are in the fine revenue?
Yes, sir.
category?
Yeah, and we have an attachment on this item that shows the balance and what's left in there.
Okay.
So, to answer, do you want to
Well,
give you the number?
when I was reviewing this, maybe I misunderstood it. It looked like to me, at first glance, that he was asking for the 161.5 to true up the FY '25, correct? But, and that may be still what he was trying to do, but it was from the purchase of, it was secondary to the purchase of the rifles and something else that he needed for operations. Did I read that correctly?
I believe so, but what I was going to tell you is, so what they say in the attachment is that what's available in the Sheriff's Department is $492,000. They're requesting $161,000. That will leave, if you approve this, it'll leave an available balance of $331,000.
Okay. And has he stated he had any other immediate needs for fine revenue?
Not that I'm aware of.
And I guess my next question is that balance, that 331,144, is that the sheriff's office's percentage of that?
That's my
That
understanding.
does not factor in our percentage, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
The Parks and Rec percentage.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, the Parks and Rec percentage. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you,
No, I was
sir.
getting ready to ask the same, I was getting ready to ask the same question. Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions?
No, ma'am.
All right, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Martin. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to new business. This is very exciting. Chief Bean, would you kick this off for us?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors. I'm going to call up Jacob Caldwell from Dominion 7, architect firm who has been our partner along with Hurt and Profit on this project. Just to give you a little background, as you all know, last year in the capital budget process, we had monies put in there to do the programming for a new station, look at what the needs are, what the desires are of our volunteers, of our career, and of you as elected officials, what you'd like to see in those buildings. So a lot of work's really gone in this in a really short amount of time. We've met with anyone who wanted to come in and speak to us, was able to do that. Folks were able to do a survey where they could answer questions. You all, thank you all, I believe everybody here participated in that, so thank you for that. And then several of us took a field trip to New Kent, Virginia to look at some fire stations. And so for anybody who knows New Kent, they'll probably look at some of our stuff and say, oh, this looks a lot like that. But we're proud of the process. We're proud of how we got here. What I think you'll find in this station is this is a station for today, tomorrow, and the next 40 years. While we try not to become too elaborate or too extravagant, we did want to have room as we needed to continue to grow, whether it's career staff, as additional volunteers, things of that nature. But also we built in this space you're going to see a place for meetings, a nice emergency operations center built within it. This would be a place to where our dispatch, as emergency management, we think a lot of continuity of operation. And unfortunately or fortunately, all of our county government is all kind of centered here within about a 3-block radius. What we like about this building is that we have our emergency operations center, but we would also be able to stand up a dispatch center temporarily in this facility within a matter of minutes and a few transfers of phone calls. So it gives you some continuity of operation, continuity of government. What you also find in here is we built this in a manner to where if you all as a governing body wanted to have meetings, you could do so, and it would be isolated from the men and women who are volunteering or working within the station, but you still have access from the public to the public meeting room or the conference room that you would need. Also worked with our friends of the Sheriff's Department, included an office space in there for them, so that, as Sheriff Ayers deputies are in the area, they have an office, they need to print something out. But we also did this in a manner to where if they were going to do some kind of operation, needed a place to brief, they could do that in the meeting room as well. So we've really thought a lot about that. It is a big station. Mr. Marks brought up a great point earlier. This was brought up about 10 years ago. And as Jacob and I were going through some of those files, they actually worked on that project, and this was about a 20,000 square foot project back then. We're happy to tell you today that that project, we've come in about 18,000 square feet. We've tried to really utilize every square inch of the building and be smart in how we did it. So I'm going to let Jacob come up, and he's going to do a quick PowerPoint. We'll go through. And I'll be here to tag team in and answer questions. So thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. I just want to thank you for your few minutes of time this evening that we could do this presentation and kind of walk you through the design here. This is a combination of fire and EMS in this station, and along with fire, I just want to emphasize that this is both career staff and volunteer firefighter. For the site plan here, I don't know how familiar you may be with this project, but this is in the Amelon Commerce Center. There is Lot 5 out there. As you come into that Commerce Center and start down the slight hill, this is on your right. So this is Lot 5A. Amelon Center Parkway kind of runs from bottom left up the page there. And the site plan here, we of course have the building. You'll notice that the bays are in the back. It is a double-sided two-entry site. There will be equipment and apparatus that will exit from both sides of that to serve the community. So having that second entrance is very important for access time. Towards the south or bottom of the site, there's a little bit of parking there. There's also diesel and diesel exhaust fluid tanks there. There's also a pad for a generator. Chief Beam mentioned the Emergency Operations Center, so we've planned to have this building up and running with the generator should there be some type of disaster. Staff would park on the east side at the rear where the equipment bays are. There'd be some public parking out front. We have included a little bit of green space on the north side. That'll become a little more apparent as we walk through the actual building itself. And we have made means to provide for a hydrant on site, so as the trucks return from calls, they can be fueled there on site. I'll briefly walk through the floor plan here. I won't take the time to go through every space, but I do think it's important that you get an overview of what the station is and the types of spaces that are included. As I said earlier, this is a combination station, not only fire and EMS, but both career staff and volunteer firefighter as well. So kind of moving from the top left corner, just left of the large space there in the center, we do have a small workout area for people that are stationed here, people that are working out of this to work out and stay up to date with their physical fitness. The large space in the center is kind of the day room, kitchen area. Obviously, there'll be a lot of time spent there. I mentioned that outdoor space to the north. Some of the design trends we are seeing are providing more natural light, giving people the chance to get outside and not just stay indoors all the time. As you move clockwise on the right, you'll see a couple of bunk rooms at the top, a third one at the bottom. A lot more female employees are getting involved now, and so gone are the days where there's one big room that everybody spends the night in. We have provided for both male and female. And also at the bottom, there is a separate room for volunteers as far as bunk rooms. The couple of rooms kind of in the middle there are some combination rooms that'll hold firefighter gear, decontamination, laundry, workbenches. Obviously, on the far right, we have the equipment bay. We've provided 5 bays. That should take care of all the equipment that we'd currently need, plus a little bit of spare room. Moving across the very bottom, there's some spaces there for volunteer offices, volunteer storage, and then moving directly to the center, you see the training room that can also serve as emergency operations. It has a small kitchen off of it, a smaller conference room, and then kind of moving up the page, there's several single restrooms with showers to take care of firefighters and EMS staff as they return from calls. We've tried to make this training room multi-purpose. I think Chief Beam alluded to the community being able to use that also for events like this if needed, and we have provided an office for the sheriff. Conceptually, this is what the front elevation would look like. This would be where the public would enter. We've tried to make this not only aesthetically pleasing, but we also know that we have a budget to work with. So we're trying to blend this in with community as well, keep it nice looking, but not spend overboard. The materials you see here, don't get too hung up on colors, but the stone at the bottom would be a manufactured stone, and then above that would be a fiber cement siding that is painted. Fiber cement does not rot or deteriorate and has ease of maintenance and longevity with life. The rear elevation here is showing the equipment bay, and you'll see the personnel door there that most of the staff would enter from parking at the rear of the site. That would be a metal siding that's on the equipment bay to kind of break up the massing, but again, be cost effective. The conceptual left side of the elevation, you'll see the outdoor area we mentioned. We did provide a dormer to try to get more natural light down into that, that day room / kitchen space. That would have a little bit taller ceiling, and again, thinking most of the staff are gonna spend that time in that area. And then the conceptual right elevation, this is kind of what the view you would have directly from the street. Here are some renderings showing what the building would look like on site with parking and required county landscaping and that kind of thing to fit within that Amelon Commerce Center. We'll just briefly go through here so you can kind of get an idea of what the building would look like. You see the outdoor area there that's covered. Again, the equipment bays on the other side. I'll pause now in case there are questions about design or any comments. We can then talk about overall project costs very briefly, but I just wanted to pause now in case there were any specific questions about what you've seen so far.
Can you go back to the floor plan, please? So the training / community room. Okay, so the front door, then there's like a foyer, and that would, you go straight through the
Yes.
foyer. to
And
the
you would
back.
have public restrooms there. so
I got
there'd
you.
be
Thank
two
you.
public restrooms.
The public entry would be access controlled so that once you're in the building, you can only go so far. You don't have free reign of the building.
Okay.
And just to mention, I'll send this PowerPoint to Mr. Bryant tomorrow, and he can share with the board so you can see it up close. And then after the meeting tonight, I'll be available at the, over by the renderings if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. Did I understand you to say that, I get the separate rooms for male and female, but are there separate rooms for volunteers versus career?
We did that, and so, again, through the survey, the volunteers wanted some separate space if there could be. And so we think we've achieved that by having some private office space for them to do their office work, but also a bunk room. So if they choose to, in bad weather events or whatever, want to stay. But also that continues to give us overflow as we grow and expand in the future if we need to in any way.
Okay. And my second question, when we did this 10 or 12 years ago, whenever it was, I learned a lot then, but they said that you had to have this big tower to hang up the fire hoses to let them drain or what, something, I don't know.
So-
Do we have that here?
So we do not. Used to, we use cotton jacket fire hose and it would mold and mildew. And if we didn't do that, it would smell really bad. And the gentleman up there to your right could attest to that. But now we use synthetic fire hose. So not as big of a deal. So we can put it on a rack or something. What we find in these fire stations, being it's a one-story fire station, in order to build one of those towers, there would have to be straight up elevation of a stairwell. And that becomes dangerous in today's world. So our preference would be to be able to rack it out somewhere in the bay space.
Thank you.
I'm impressed, Ms. Tarkin.
Thank you. Even you, Mr. Adams, even you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all. Yep, we'll go. Sorry. The most important thing, we're talking about money.
Yeah, we gotta talk about money now.
I
You
was
probably don't wanna
walking
be here
away,
for
we were all
that.
happy, but
Thank you, sir. We
no,
appreciate you.
but he'll talk about some of the money real quick.
Okay.
Would you mind?
All right, so yes, now back to business. So what we've tried to do here, we've tried to not only give you the building construction cost or the building and site construction cost, we've tried to include other things that may be required or other things that might pop up and try to give you a total project cost. I think oftentimes people want to know cost and they hone in on construction cost only. I think for you all, you need to see total project cost so that there's no surprises later on down the road. So I'm just going to kind of walk through line by line, and then if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them. Third-party inspections, these are going to be special inspections. These are going to be required by building code. Most likely, you're probably looking at concrete. If this has some steel columns in it, there will also be some to do with how the steel is erected. We have that as an allowance of $35,000. The building permit is estimated. That is going to be a cost based on the square footage of the building. I tried to do the math to make sure that's accurate. Virginia Stormwater Management and purchase of nutrient credits, that is an $18,000 cost. I got that number from Hurt and Profit. We feel like that's a pretty accurate number based on the information we have here today. The next two numbers, water connection fee, sewer connection fee, I've somewhat made an assumption that the county, there would not be a connection fee for the county. So if I need to put something in for that, I'm happy to do that. Data and cabling, we know you're going to need some network drops and connectivity there with this station. We made an assumption, a few drops, $10,000. Security cameras, again, we've made an assumption allowing 10 of those. That's roughly around $15,000. The biggest one, of course, is the actual construction of the building. You can see here that's based on a little over 18,000 square feet. That's almost $9.3 million. We do have an owner construction contingency included. Right now, that's roughly about 10%. And then furniture, you're going to need something for the bunks, maybe a couple chairs in the front, definitely some chairs and tables for the training multipurpose room. We've included an allowance of $50,000 for that. That gets us to the subtotal for construction of a little over 10.3. The AE fees are based on that 10.3 number. I am not at all saying that your AE fees are going to be that. I'm just trying to give you a number to plug in so that you can plan for that. That brings your total cost to a total project cost to a little over $11 million. So I know that's a lot we've kind of thrown at you, but again, I think it's important that you see the big picture project cost and not just work on the actual construction cost. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes, and if there's questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Board members?
I didn't see the cost of the generator in there, and personally, I think your furniture and fixture number is very low.
Okay. I don't necessarily disagree with you, and as far as the construction cost, that number has the generator included. I'm happy to break that out separate, but I think you bring up a good point.
And Chief, if I may, what our thought would be, as you know, we got the grant recently for the extractors and things like that. The bottle fill, all that would come over. As we bought furniture when we moved back across the street to the Life Saving Crew or to the Manelican Rescue Building, we bought furniture that was compatible, we thought, with what we would use, so we could use that. But you're right, that may be a bit low. The security cameras, we don't think we'll need as much, because we're probably gonna do one or two, maybe watching that front lobby, what have you. But yeah, that's a great point. That was something that Jacob and I had talked about.
And on the same tune that Mr. Martin was just speaking of, I'm assuming like kitchen appliances, things like that are in the primary construction costs as well.
That would probably be, is it in your,
It
okay.
is, okay, all right, thank you, Jake.
Perfect, even
Thank you.
better. And so I guess so I know Davenport will be here in a minute to talk about the cost and funding and so forth, but I think what guidance we're looking for is, one, is this in tune with what you're thinking? Is this the direction you all as a board want to go? Are the things we need to take out that you think are too much, or the things that you would like to see included? That's kind of where we are as we wrap this and put a nice bow on this package of the development phase. But also, we're looking for guidance of, where we go from here, so.
I would say there's still discussion that has to be had.
Sure.
But if you're gonna build this, I think you need to build it to last. So like cabinets, flooring options, all that kind of stuff, I would not go cheap.
Yes, sir.
Longevity.
And I think what we projected was mid-grade, so that's a great. All good points. Other things?
Any other questions?
All right, I still
Thank
have a
you.
job, that's good. All right, you didn't run Jacob and I off from up here, so we did good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your feedback.
Appreciate your work. All right, next we have Mr. Roland Cooch.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tucker, and members of the board. It's great to be here tonight, and nice to follow a presentation to know what we're actually conceptually looking at. We're just dealing with numbers here. Glad to be here in front of you tonight to talk about how this could be financed and what it might look like from a future debt service obligation standpoint. Before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of this, I'd like to go a little bit of a background. Here I stand in front of you today. My former colleague and I traded off on a variety of times, but we've always been working with the county over the past, we go back at least 15 years, if not 20 years, in terms of looking at capital planning. And over the course of this relationship with the county, we've assisted with numerous financings, most recently the landfill financing that was done earlier this year. That was the 2025 bond that was done in relationship to the cell 2 of the landfill. What you'll see is we did that under one of the financing options that I'll go over tonight, and one of the financing options that could be available to you for this public safety project. One of the things I'm going to do tonight is also look back and have a refresher of how we did the landfill and how that debt service layers into your existing debt profile and your existing debt service. So that's going to be in here because that's the foundation for what we're talking about with respect to the new public safety project and how that debt service may affect the previous plan and what may be needed in terms of new revenues to support the new payments coming online for this project. One thing I'd like to point out is when we presented the landfill plan of finance earlier this year, we always were of the mindset that this involved some one-time funds to kind of bridge sort of a peak in debt service, and that was part of the landfill plan of finance. As the existing debt service drops, there's the ability to take advantage of that debt payment drop in the future. But we've got to get through the next, we'll call 5-year time frame, which has a peak of debt service that we've got to bridge. And that's what you'll see in this presentation tonight, how we do that and what that means in terms of various financing options and how they might affect that peak that we're going to see in the next several years. So with that, we just saw the presentation on the public safety project. That is the numbers that we factored into this analysis, a little over $11 million. When we look at this, we're anticipating from a time frame standpoint that this project begins in earnest really around the summer of calendar year 2026. That's what the cash flows assume. So effectively, the beginning of FY27 is kind of the start-off point for this in terms of the impact. Okay. So whoops, I went backwards the wrong way. So the goals and objectives, and I alluded to this earlier on in my introduction, is really talking about the existing tax-supported debt profile, kind of laying that foundation of where we were and how we got to where we are today. Looking at the key attributes of various financing options that the county might avail itself to. Those are direct bank loan done through the EDA, Virginia Resources Authority, which could be a pooled financing program, which we're participating with other local borrowers. They finance 3 times a year generally. And USDA, the other option there that's through the Rural Development Program, the USDA program, and their community services financing program, specifically for these types of projects. We're going to also provide a perspective on debt capacity. That's generally the relative levels of debt that the county would have both before and after this project, and how that relates to both policy that the county has in place, also best practices with respect to general guidelines and general benchmarks for debt service and debt capacity. The second piece is debt affordability. That's where we get into how does the cash flow impact the current debt service, what sort of resources might be needed to cover that cash flow, and then ultimately how might it layer in future years as well. Lastly, with respect to the financing options, we presented and kind of run some numbers, but how can we potentially minimize that impact to the county to the extent possible? So on this next section, before we get into the actual impact of the public safety project, I'd like to go over kind of a refresher course of what the existing debt profile looked before the 2025 landfill financing. And on this page, really when you look at the graph on the left-hand side, the numbers are on the right-hand side, and you can see the numbers going all the way down. But the graph really sort of says it all in terms of the picture. What you can see there is we have an element of both county as well as school debt and a little bit of other debt that's really kind of very minimal from that perspective. But you can see that profile starts from 2025, 2026 timeframe, and then it peaks up, and you can see it peaks up a little bit and then drops back down, but then really starts to drop in 2032. What we're talking about here is these are the county's obligations in terms of debt service payments, both principal and interest, going forward from this point in time. And we're comparing that to 2 sort of dotted lines. One was the 24 budgeted level of debt service, and then ultimately what that debt service evolved to when you add the approximate 2% meals tax to that. So that blue line now is what we're considering your existing debt service budget. And that was built into place before the landfill financing. We talked about this and presented it earlier this year with respect to the review that we did. And when you look at that number, there's roughly about 1.7 million in that little box. That's the one-time revenue that we talked about that was needed to kind of bridge the peak of debt service before we have some really big affordability coming online with respect to that decline in 2032. Now, that was always the plan that we put in place. By and large, this was as a result of the original schools funding plan and the approach to get that funded there. So moving forward with respect to the affordability aspect, again, this is before the decline in debt service, and I won't read all of those bullet points, but when we look at that, you can see that the dark green now represents your existing debt service. And again, we're comparing it to the 2024 blue line, which is the dotted line, in terms of what that debt service budget is. That's roughly about $4.5 million of recurring revenue a year to pay for all of that debt service in the dark green. What you see in the light green bar is what we're calling the affordability. By the time we get to 2032, then we have the ability to layer in new debt service. That debt service is partially, and when we're talking about the analysis, is going to be represented by the financing for this public safety project. So the challenge is, how do we get from 2026 through the peaks of 2027 through 2031? What is the impact on the county there until we can get to the affordability side? Because we don't want to delay this project any more than we have to. We know with inflation these days, if you don't do it today, this project can be a multiple of it down the line. So on the next slide, I'm trying to get responses. Okay, so what we have here on this, taking the last picture from the previous page, we've got a left-hand side, which is the debt service picture before the financing. We're talking about that little box there on the left-hand side is 1.7 million. We've talked about that was the original plan before the landfill. Putting the landfill in place, layered debt service on top of that, and we cash flowed some of that a little bit on the front end, but there's full amortizing debt service now in that light green bar. What that resulted in was moving from a $1.7 million, what we'll call one-time need of funds to cover that peak, roughly to about 3.8 million. And again, this is absent any new recurring revenue. So without any new recurring revenue, that number's about 3.8 million. But you can see then we still have a decline in debt service in 2032. There's still some inherent built-in affordability when we get to that time frame. But we still have to bridge that gap. So that's the current day position of where we are after the landfill financing. That's a combination of use of fund balance, roughly about 2 million, but then also needing some additional revenues beginning in FY 2029. So we've got a few years to go before we really need those revenues. And that, that roughly is about 1.8 million until we get past this peak of debt service. So I'll stop there with any questions before I start layering in the second part of this analysis, which is the public safety building.
Mr. Adams?
Thank you, ma'am. So, Roland, let's stick with the graph where we're at right now. I tried to process all this last night. It was a great presentation, but it was a little overwhelming.
Sure, no problem.
So let's talk about these one-time fees. I see between the existing debt service, we keep referring to the 1.7 or the 1.66,
Right,
which is
right.
1.7, as a one-time cost. But I also see it over a 5-year period.
Yes.
Can you, just for me and for anybody in the public want to know, I hear one time, but I see it in a graph showing stretched out over 5 years. So
Right.
explain that to me, please, sir.
So that's a good question. What I mean by one-time revenues is this is basically a one-time set-aside of, we'll talk about the 1.7 million and 1.66 million. It might occur over multiple years like it does here. You know, it kind of peaks up, but it goes down. But it's really a chunk of one-time 1.6 million. If you were to do nothing else beyond the left-hand side of the page, this is before the landfill financing, All you have to do is come up with 1.6 million and apply it over that 5-year time frame, and that'll bridge you that gap, sort of that peak, till we get to 2032. So that's what I mean by one time. We don't need the 1.6 million every year. We just need a kind of a set aside of it, but it covers about a 5-year time frame. The bulk of which is needed in year roughly, 2028, because that's kind of the peak there. After that, it's smaller numbers, in the 250,000 range. But that's what we mean by one-time reference. It's not a recurring annual 1.6 million that you need in the budget.
And I'm assuming what you're referring to on that blue dotted line with what we've budgeted for debt service in FY '24 moving forward.
That's right. Maintaining.
And the 2% meals tax is what we are currently, is that on a budgeted level for what we budgeted at FY '24 as well?
That's right. It's the 24 budget number for debt service plus the 2% meals tax that was added to that number to get you to about 4.5 million allocated to or budgeted to annual debt service.
Okay, because that 2 cents is what 2% rather is what we've set aside for nothing but debt service, correct, Mr. Brown?
Correct, that's right.
Okay. And then, Roland, and then we can move on, but going back to where you said in 2032, and I think out of all of this, and we can get to this later on as well, I think this is probably my most concerning about all of this, is when 2032, it looks like we free up somewhere in the area of 1.4, 1.5 mil in financing?
Before the landfill, yes, but after the landfill, we're really on the right-hand side of the page. So we look at the left-hand side, we're talking about the 1.6.
Oh, I was on page 6. Excuse me. All right, I see what you're saying. So really, we're not clearing up much room for additional financing.
You are, in a way. We'll look at some of the numbers in here when we look at this.
Okay.
Because once we get past this peak, I think what we'll see is that it can be fit, this project can be fit into the 2032 timeframe. We just have to bridge that gap till we get there into 2032. And you'll see how it slots in. And I'll show you that. It depends on the scenario. But it could be slotted into that gap beginning in 2032 based on the blue dotted line.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir.
So the next section, again, just walking through this, again, this is basically taking, Mr. Adams, this is just taking the exact same information you saw on the previous page, the right-hand side, and just saying, this is now your existing profile. This is the current situation of the county, which includes the landfill financing. So you can see that we talked about here, the 3.8 million, that 1.7 becomes 3.8. But by and large, you've got money that'll carry you through 2027, 28. You got to get to 29, and 29, that's when you'll need additional, we'll call additional resources above the 1.7 million that we just talked about. Now, in beginning 32, that same thing we just talked about, that's where your window opens up. So that's when we'll start to see in these scenarios going forward, what can slot in beginning in 2032, how much of that affordability will work, and how much will that take care of in terms of the potential public safety building project. And then on the next pages, we wanted to also present to you some key debt ratios. So we know we've got some affordability that we just talked about. Here on the next several pages, we're going to talk about the key debt ratios in terms of credit metrics and industry standard metrics. Again, one of those is a 10-year payout ratio. How much of your principal are you repaying in 10 years? Generally, after we look at this, you're in the 53%. It's north of 50%, which is generally considered a benchmark ratio, a good practice ratio. A good policy range can be anywhere from 50 to 65%. You can see that when we look at the metrics, a lot of the rated peers, as well as the Virginia governmental, as well as the budget peers and kind of your same peer range, have higher payout ratios. Could be from a variety of factors. I don't think, more than likely, it is not from financing things over 10 years. It's going to be, a balancing of budgetary pressure, because the shorter you finance something, the higher this ratio is going to get. But then it's going to also cause affordability issues. So we have to balance those two things out. You're right at a good balance at just north of 50%. So the next ratio, you do have a policy here. And also, we're looking at the ratio of debt to assessed value. This is total outstanding tax-supported debt paid from by local governmental revenues that we just talked about in relationship to the assessed valuation of the tax base. Looking at this, you're right at 1.8% based on 2026 numbers. That is well within what we'll call an industry standard benchmark and best practice range. You're actually below that range. You're below your policy range as well. Your policy states that you're at about a 3.5% policy target not to exceed. What that means is if we were to do debt up to that number to take you up to 3.5%, that would equate to roughly $53 million. Not saying that you do that. We're just saying if you were at that 3.5% policy target, you'd be an additional $53 million more than you had today. So this is a very good ratio. You're in very good standing, and you can see that ratio continues to decline over the years going forward. Okay?
So, Roland, if
Yes.
I may, before you continue, so, am I understanding this correctly? You're talking about for what Chief Beam and the county's talking about as far as the construction of the new public safety building, that we will be projected to start on the financing somewhere around 27, 28?
Yes, the financing, what you're going to see in here, the numbers and the impact will assume and show you the impact to the county if the financing were to occur, and the impact would start in 2027.
Okay.
So it's the numbers we just talked about, and kind of what I'll call the one-time kind of bridging that peak of debt service. You're going to see the impact to that peak, and we're going to show you what that means based on the various financing options.
Okay, and before we get to that, because well, by looking at your graph here, so are you indicating that we would have the public safety, theoretically speaking, the public safety building would be paid off by 2049?
No, this does not. This is existing
just
debt
existing,
before the
has
public.
nothing
Yeah, before the
enough.
public.
Okay.
We wanted to show you what your ratios look like at your current debt position
Gotcha.
today.
Okay.
So all things are indicating you have very healthy debt ratios. So I think the purposes of these slides to show you where you are in context of your policies, and also where you are in context of rated as well as budgetary peers throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So all the ratios are indicating that you have very good and very healthy debt ratios. The next slide here is the last key debt benchmark that I'll talk about. There was a previous policy in the 10% range. This represents debt service as a percentage of your overall budget. And generally speaking, it's the equivalent of how much is effectively our mortgage payment on all of our debt. Generally speaking, the best practices benchmark is in the 12 to 16% range. You don't want to be any higher than that. Might see the 16% is the high end of that range. A policy level that we see often throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia is 10%. So how much out of every $100 of your budget, no more than $10 would go to debt service. That's what that effectively means. Right now, you've got you're in about the 4 to 5% range when you look at the years here in terms of your debt service relative to your budget and expenditure projection, which is a very good ratio to be in. This is very solid. You're actually below all of the benchmarks there in terms of the ratings, except for the Virginia A's. but you're effectively below all of those peer benchmarks in terms of this ratio. Again, all things indicating towards a very healthy debt level. As I alluded to, 3 potential financing options here. The direct bank loan approach, you recently availed yourself to that with the landfill financing. That is issued through the EDA, so it's the conduit issue. The county would effectively just pay the debt service, but by Virginia statute, you have to go through an EDA as a conduit to issue this. Virginia Resources Authority, again, looking at the pooled financing program. One thing I'd like to point out before we go to that, the key differences there is the direct bank loan is probably the quickest to implement in terms of the overall schedule. You have control and the ability to do that based on your time frame. Flexible prepayment terms, so you can generally pay those off under more advantageous terms than you can the VRA approach. Limitations, though, we have are on the amortization, the repayment cycle. So generally speaking, we see direct bank loans offered up to the 20-year time frame. So that is effectively a 20-year mortgage in terms of payments. Talking about a long-term project, if you're doing a 25, project that's going to last, generations, then generally 25 or even 30 years can be viewed as acceptable for these types of projects. Direct bank loans, while they might offer more flexible repayment, you've got to deal with a higher cash flow of repayment. It's the equivalent of having a 15-year mortgage. You're going to reduce your interest cost, but your payments can be a lot higher than a 30-year mortgage. So think of the direct bank loan as more akin to a shorter-term mortgage repayment cycle. The Virginia Resources Authority, you have effectively about 3 opportunities a year in a fiscal year to participate in that pool. Now that has the flexibility to go as long as 30 years, and you have the flexibility to structure the loan repayments. That is to say, if we have that peak of debt service over the next 5 years, can we manage our principal repayments to work around that peak and kind of reduce the cash flow impact? VRA offers that flexibility. Now, you do have a little bit of a higher upfront cost of issuance because you've got to pay a share of VRA's issuance costs. Generally, the prepayment of that loan has a 10-year window where you cannot prepay it for either refinancing or just accelerating the debt. And then lastly, the rates are set based on the public markets. So that's subject to change until they actually issue their bonds. Generally speaking, though, from a tax-exempt perspective, you can generally get the longest amortizing, lowest cost of funds through VRA compared to a direct bank loan. Direct bank loan may have a little bit higher cost of funds, but it's definitely going to have a shorter repayment cycle from that. Lastly, the USDA Community Facilities Program. This is a direct loan from the USDA. Timeline can be longer, upwards of 12 to 18 months. The USDA says, yeah, we all know, working with the government, they say once you meet all their conditions and meet all their their terms in terms of the letter of conditions, it can be a 3 to 4 month cycle, but getting to that point can be easily 6 to 12 months, upwards of that, if not longer. They do offer longer amortization, 30 and upwards to 40 years. So when we look at that interest rate generally is going to be on the higher end. It is a taxable cost of funds. And they do offer what we'll call subsidized rates, but those rates are depending on certain conditions in terms of poverty indices and so forth that they calculate, but it's still based on current market taxable rates. So, when we were thinking about USDA a few years ago, current market taxable rates were in the 2% range. That's a very attractive cost of funds. Today, current market taxable rates are in the high 4s to low 5s. So when we think about that, that's a taxable rate. They're going to price your repayment based on the schedule. We look at VRA, a 30-year financing is probably a benchmark rate of about 4.5%. So there's really not a rate advantage right now in the current market with USDA. There's limited structuring flexibility. You do have to do a secondary interim financing with USDA. You just can't get the USDA loan and start drawing down on it. They require a secondary interim financing to start the process. Once you finish the project on your interim financing, then they'll start the permanent loan after that and pay off the interim financing. Lastly, they do require a debt service reserve fund. So your loan payments are going to be higher by approximately 10% over the first 10 years. They want you to fund 1 year's worth of reserve fund payments over a 10-year time frame. So your initial cash flows are going to be higher by about 10% in terms of the loan repayment to fund that reserve. So those are some of the key differences in terms of what these programs offer. And we factored all those into our analysis in the next section. So public safety financing, now we're getting to the numbers and what this really means. So on this page, we've summarized the assumptions. Basically, all of these projects start off with the project fund roughly about $11,030,000, with the caveat that the USDA does require and has some federal requirements when it comes to construction. Those are Build America, Buy America, as well as Davis-Bacon wage requirements. Those generally, when we talk to architects and we talk to planners who are looking at these types of USDA programs, those generally add anywhere from 3 to 5% to the construction cost. So while we're looking at comparing these numbers, we're now estimating that the USDA option would add about 5% on a conservative basis. And what that does is that increases the total cost of the project from $11,030,000 to about $11,550,000. That's what we'll be looking at financing under USDA relative to the other three options. Now, direct bank loan, we've got a 20-year financing in here. We've got a planning rate of 5%. That's a ballpark. You could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. We had some bank RFPs come back recently in this range, so 5% is a good planning number when you look at that. VRA, looking at the spring pool in 2026, if we're on the time frame where this is going to get financed, could be as early as the spring pool, could be the summer pool as well, but we assume spring pool from a timing standpoint, and just ballparking a rate roughly around 4.5% based on current market planning estimates. Now, that's a 30-year financing that we're assuming there. We're assuming then one option to do VRA is a 30-year fully amortizing from day one financing, principal and interest. The second option in column C is a 30-year, what we're calling a structured financing, having an interest-only period that wraps around those 5 years and then fully repays itself in the balance of the 25 years. Still have a 30-year financing, you just have an interest-only period because we got to get around those cash flows and want to see what that looks like in terms of the affordability. The last one is USDA at 40-year level debt service. Then, and you'll see that we've assumed a 4.875% interest rate. Now, that is what we're calling the intermediate rate. That's this quote unquote the subsidized or below market rate. The USDA market rate is 5.25%. So if you had to pay the USDA market rate, it's going to be even higher than the cash flows we've shown in here from this standpoint. Now, based on their rate indices, if you qualify for the most advantageous rate under USDA, that takes you down to potentially 4.5%, which is the equivalent to the VRA financing option. So what does this all kind of boil down to in terms of the summary results? And we've got cash flows, so I can take you to a cash flow picture of what this looks like based on each one of these scenarios. But what we wanted to do was show you the illustration of that time frame, that 27 through 31 time frame, and what the debt service then looks like going forward, even beyond that, but especially in the 27 through 31 time frame, and what that translates into additional revenues that might be needed. Now, we talked about where we stand today, roughly about 3.8 million in terms of the landfill to kind of bridge that gap. Now, if we were to look at the direct bank loan, you can see that direct bank loan goes from about 530,000 of interest in the first year to full repayments at about 915,000. That's full principal and interest based on the interest rate that we've assumed, which is 5%. Now, over a 20-year time frame, this results in about almost $18 million of repayment of both principal and interest. This, by far, if you look at the bottom line number, that's the lowest amount of interest you're going to be repaying. But the converse to that is that you've got the highest payment that you have to make. It's the equivalent, again, the analogy of 15-year mortgage versus 30-year mortgage. If I'm a personal homeowner, love to shorten my interest payments, but I just might not be able to finance my home over 15 years. Might have to go to the 30. So that takes us to VRA, takes us to the 30-year option. Again, we're looking at level debt service. Again, that's starting off with the interest only in the first year while we're building the project, but then level debt service is now under $710,000 on average over the life of the loan. It goes out 30 years. Now, the difference there from just under 18 million takes you to right over 21 million. That's a combination of a longer period of amortization, but we're doing it at 4.5%. So we've got a slightly lower cost of funds. Net, you're paying an additional amount of interest from 18 to roughly 21. That's about $3 million worth of interest over the life cycle of 30 years relative to the 20-year loan repayment. Now, taking it a step further, column C, we're looking at roughly a 30-year structured repayment. And again, this goes from right around 500 to 525,000, interest only over this, what we'll call the peak debt service years that you have in the next 5 years. That's the new revenues you're going to have to come up with. But when you look at 2032 and thereafter, that payment is about 765,000, slightly more than what you see under column B. You're going from 710 to about 765. That means then you're going to be putting a little bit of principal out a little further, but you're still repaying it over a 30-year window. And the impact to that is increasing your total interest cost by about $600,000. So for the benefit of lowering your cash flow in the next 5 years by about just under $200,000, you're balancing that out with about an additional $600,000 of interest over that same time frame. So it's a trade-off, again, of the budgetary impact. Can we mitigate that budgetary impact in the near term? What's it going to cost and balancing that over the long term? The last financing option here, USDA, that roughly looks like interest only for about $580,000 while we're constructing it. That's your interim financing. Then when you look at the annual repayments, that's about $735,000 over the next 4 years thereafter. That is the second highest only to the 20-year repayment of the direct bank loan. But when you look at the repayment over the life cycle of 40 years, that's about $28 million of principal and interest. You can see that interest expense jumps up because we're paying it over a longer time frame. And also, one might think, okay, let's go for the 40-year time frame if the cash flows are better. But here in this situation, we don't even have better cash flows. So we would not even consider, we'd kind of throw that one aside as a last resort. So lastly, on the last page, kind of a summary of observations, summary of the preliminary results. I sort of kind of said all this in not so many words in the past 5 minutes, but the VRA option really provides the county the most flexibility to structure the financing up to the 30-year time frame, mitigate those cash flows. We'd like it if the direct bank loan would do that, but banks really want to start paying back sooner rather than later. Direct bank loan results do provide the lowest overall, kind of fastest repayment, the lowest overall interest expense, but they do put the most stress on your budget going forward in terms of additional debt service. And lastly, funding through USDA does not materially add any benefits here based on the current rate, the repayment cycle, especially the need to fund the debt service reserve. It really doesn't provide any material benefit until way after 10 years in terms of cash flows. But over the life cycle, you're going to be paying a lot more of interest over the long run. Last points, we talked about reserves in terms of applying to that peak of debt service. The highlighted numbers you saw on the previous page are the additional amounts you'd need over that 5-year time frame. In order to reduce the draws on those, one option is potentially looking at ways to add to the budget or increasing the budget for debt service to mitigate some of these cash flows over the 5-year time frame. Again, we're not recommending that, but that's one way to address kind of the peak of that debt service. And maybe what I'd like to do here is go through and show you one example, and I'll take you to tab 7. All these look the same for each one, but tab 7 is the VRA kind of structured approach with 5 years of interest only. And Mr. Adams, this takes you back to the pictures we saw, kind of laying the groundwork for the analysis. So the left-hand side of the page, that is where we stand today after the landfill financing. So we talk about that shaded brown box there. That represents the cash flows you see down below in terms of columns A through D. Effectively, we have about $2 million of fund balance when we're looking at that until we get to 2029. By the time we get to 2029, to get to the last 3 years of that debt service range, we're going to need that additional amount, roughly about $1.8 million of new revenues to cover the landfill debt service. When we get to 2032, 31, it goes away. 2032, we have the drop, and that's where you see the gap between the blue line, which is your budgeted level, and your existing debt service. Looking on the right-hand side of the page, what does the additional public safety building do in terms of that 1.8 million? That increases it to the right-hand side of the page, makes it roughly 4.4 million over that same time frame. But what you can see, this goes to the gap in the debt service and the affordability between your budget and the existing debt service. When you get to 2032, your existing budget takes care of it. There's no more additional revenues needed. It fits within your current budget for affordability. The near-term 5-year horizon is the need where we'll have to come up with additional revenues to fund the public safety building, public safety project. But once we get past that, it's built into your affordability. Hopefully that gives you a graphic representation of what we're talking about on the summary.
It's a really comprehensive presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board members? It's a lot to digest.
A tremendous amount.
And there's, the thing is, we'd be glad to come back and do some work sessions for you and as you think about it and think about strategies for it as well. So, I know it's a lot to digest and there's a lot of information here.
That's a point I wanted to make to the audience and to people who are watching us on YouTube, is that we never expected to make it. We're not going to make it any type of decision tonight. So this is informational for us and for the public as well.
Madam Chair, if I could ask Roland a couple questions. So on this slide, Roland, when you look at the right side of the page, so basically based on our budgeted amounts, just where everybody can understand and making sure I'm reading it right, all the way out till basically 2041, correct? We really can't take on any additional debt service based on what we're looking at now. Is that?
2031. The drop happens in 2032. Oh, you're talking about after the public safety building?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Once you layer in the public safety building,
Yeah, that's what I'm speaking of.
then basically 2041, based on the existing payments, then you'd have to come up with some new revenues
Right.
at this point. So additional future capital projects would require more budgeted revenues towards debt service. And that speaks to when you think about your debt service budget, your overall budget in terms of numbers, you're still roughly at about 5 to 6% when we think about it going forward. I think if we looked at the next slide, you know, the debt service to expenditures, that top right-hand corner, your peak is roughly right at 6%. Best practices range, you're nowhere near a 10% in terms of allocating new revenues to debt service. So even if you stayed with the current budget and went with this plan, you're going to be well below a 10% of revenues to debt service, to allocated debt service. But what it does mean from an affordability standpoint, while you're still really good there, if you wanted to layer on or needed to layer on additional money, new projects, you're going to have to come up with new recurring revenue sources. And I think going back to this page, you know, if you wanted to do the public safety, think about it from this perspective. If you wanted to do the right-hand side, have the public safety project, yet stick with the impact of 3.8 million on the left-hand side. Looking at the farthest right-hand column, this goes back to the summary results, that's the recurring revenue in column H. That effectively is the debt service on the public safety project. If you were to come up with those kind of numbers on a recurring basis to add to the budget, then effectively you're raising that blue dotted line by about $500,000. While it would mitigate the need for what we'll call the yellow box of one-time sources, it kind of keeps it minimized, but it also positions you for future projects down the road. So think about the more you can kind of, you know, when you think about addressing the need to pay for this on a budgetary basis, once you get past 2032, any amounts you add to that budgetary line build more additional affordability down the road.
On those VRAs, I saw the different time cycles that you can apply for those.
Yep.
When you apply for those, is that a guarantee? I mean, if you apply for them, I mean, are they guaranteed funds, but as long as you file accordingly? I'm not familiar.
Generally speaking, yes. For a county like Amherst County, good credit position, good budgetary performance, good metrics, nice tax base. I won't say guarantee, but generally the VRA likes and approves these types of credits for local governments. It's only when you have troubled budgets, low fund balances, difficulty with economic activity. Those tend to be a little bit more difficult to get through VRA. And we're talking about local governments that might be in that position. For Amherst County, we would not think there would be any problems applying to VRA with this type of project.
So Madam Chair, this is more for us and the county administrator moving forward. My concerns are with the future needs of this county, right? We've taken on the financing for the school system, clearly, the landfill. Where, and I guess this is an open-ended question for anybody, how do we put all of these pieces of the puzzle together to give us some direction moving forward to make sure that we are doing proper financial strategic planning for future big needs, big money needs, right? To give us more clarity on, we know the need, we clearly understand the need with this project. But my concern is, as this county continues to grow, obviously with growth, it should produce more revenues. That's the thought process, and we certainly hope that occurs. I just want to know from a strategy standpoint for us as a board, how do we foresee, or Mr. Bryant, have you thought about this? How do we start planning this? Because the next question is, from a construction standpoint for the public safety building, how much time do we have to make a decision on this before we start? And Jacob, this may be a question for you. How much time do we have before that 11 million number could potentially change, right? And we're looking at having to finance a larger number. So there's a lot that's got to come together here, as far as I'm concerned, for us to make the right decisions. So I would welcome a little bit of discussion from my fellow board members on that to see how we do this.
Well, a couple of things before I get to that. So, at the beginning of the meeting, we had a very distinguished citizen talk about the Gateway project and us backing, what is it, roughly 2.2 million, and that not being built into this. If we did have to start covering that debt service, that debt, what does that do to these numbers?
That debt, and we looked at the Amherst County Service Authority pro forma. Right now, you're covering the interest on that debt, and that's built into the budget. We're not showing it here because it's already budgeted in the county's budget. The pro forma analysis that we did for the Service Authority assumed that would be built into their permanent financing for both the 23A band and the 23B bands that we did, which was the Gateway project. To the extent, and I think the plan was always, if needed, if it couldn't be repaid from authority revenues, then future growth related to that project, and we know whenever that happens, future growth would be used to help offset some of the shortfalls there. Right now, I think the last pro forma we had did not anticipate, we fully baked it into the pro forma and the rate plan for the authority itself. So right now it has, the assumption is the authority rate plan would cover it. To the extent it doesn't, then that incremental growth beginning in 2027, 2028 was the assumption at the time would help offset some of the shortfall in that cash flow. That number is about 175,000, I think, Sam, in that pro forma? Just under 200,000 in terms of cash flow, if you had to cover 100% of it.
So, Mr. Adams, I think we probably need a separate work session to
I
talk
agree.
about
Yeah, yeah.
not
that's
this
something-
just, but overall budgetary needs. I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to move forward with this. A lot of questions I have. You know, what happens to the current stations? All right, how long is our agreement with the volunteer system on that current rescue squad building? Is it adequate? You know, is this a definitive need right now? You know, he kept alluding to, basically what you're alluding to was, you know, increasing revenues, which is raising taxes, right? The dirty word.
Yeah, that's either growth or essentially a tax adjustment.
Take a whole lot of growth, right? So, and basically what you're talking about, with taxes, you're raising that blue line to increase your debt. I don't think we understand yet what the reassessment's gonna do. I don't think we understand yet how much stomach we're gonna have for that reassessment and what it's gonna do to our tax rate. I don't think we know a lot of things right now. So I would suggest we set aside a separate time to just talk about our kind of future budgetary needs, sooner than later, right? So that's where I'm at.
You had said that the financing for this would start in 2027, right?
Yes, based on the schedule. If you're on the schedule, it would.
Chief Beam, you said that this would start, if everything went perfectly, July of 2026, right? My question to you, Chief Beam, is how long would it take you to build this thing?
Sure. We're probably 18 months. You know, if you said go today, Jake was probably a better teller of that story than I am, but I would say probably at least 18 months. Minimally 6 months for A&E, construction of the year.
I think that's fair. For talking purposes tonight, I think 18 is good. Not to open up a whole nother can of worms, but there's some things you could do that get into kind of the procurement side. And I don't want to open up a whole nother discussion, but the traditional route would be design, bid, build. You could decrease that time frame potentially if you went to more like a design build process. And again, I'm not trying to lengthen the conversation. I'm just saying there are some options out there that we haven't even begun to discuss.
I appreciate it. I was just responding to some texts that I was already getting about how long will it take, you know.
Sure. Yeah, minimally, if we had, everything set up today, probably minimally 18 months. Our timeline, based on budgetary, was in FY '26. I know we're going to be discussing capital budgets in the coming weeks, would be for A&E to be included in FY '26, that 600-some thousand, and then construction cost in FY '27, which would be 10 to 11 months from now. But again, that's all flexible. That's just based on the way the 3 to 5 year capital budget was built out.
Thank you. Board members, any further questions? Mr. Wade, look like you're getting ready to say something. Okay. All right. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on down to county attorney's report.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything specific. However, I would just remind the board that the county continues to receive opioid settlement funds. We are in the process of coming to a final deadline with the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy, as well as the settlement with the manufacturers. So that will be additional monies that will start flowing hopefully by the end of the year. But again, those are monies that are specifically pigeonholed for opioid-related expenses. So, but that's all I have.
And so will they come in, not all at one time, but kind of in a stretch of time over certain months?
Correct. There are annual payments that come in.
Annual payments, that's
Yes, ma'am.
right. That's right, I remember that. Thank you. All right, moving on, Mr. Martin.
Sure, so the Parks and Recreation Board continues to meet on a monthly basis. That group's continuing to do some great work. Our Parks and Rec Director, in conjunction with our Public Works, and did some cleanup on the Blue Ridge Rail Trail. Some events coming up. The Halloween Spooktacular for our children is October the 24th from 6 to 8 at Coolwell Recreation. There is also a Senior Adult Fall Festival Trunk or Treat coming up. The date
Say
is,
it.
what? I didn't say it. I know you're going, but anyway, I'll probably be right there with you. And also, remind the public that the Parks and Recreation Department does have Busch Garden discount tickets on sale.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Adams, you want to talk to us about the Emergency Services Council?
Madam Chair, we had a meeting last Wednesday night, and I was under the weather and was unable to attend. Chief Beam, is there anything that you would want to address that came out of that, sir?
Just the only thing would be, as we worked on SOGs, one thing that came out of that over the last year was incident command. We've taken a lot of pride in doing better accountability and having more structured incident command. We've rolled out our instant command boards that have been specifically designed for Amherst County throughout all the fire departments. So pretty excited about that.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
All right, next we have Ms. Neville is going to speak to us about the Library Board of Trustees. Welcome, Ms. Neville. It's been a
Neville.
long evening. I'm sure you can wait for us.
That's okay. So I'm Sandy Jennings Neblett, and I am currently the president of the, hold on, let me get this started the right way. Nope. Okay, there we go. All right. Madam Chair, members, I'm Sandy Jennings Neblett. I'm the president of the Board of Trustees for the Amherst Library. I was here a year ago, and this will be my last year with you guys. My term finishes up in June, so there'll be someone new to replace me. I've served my 2 terms, so, but I've enjoyed my time on the library board, for sure. Our board remains unchanged from last year. We did have our vice president role changed from Larry to Naomi, but everyone else is still the same as last year. You can see from our circulation overview that our circulation continues to increase. I think that this shows that our library services are very much valued and used by our citizens, and they continue to use the services more and more each year. Didn't have quite as much of an increase from 24 to 25 as we did from 23 to 24, but there's still a steady increase. So there's still a lot of value and use in our library services. Anytime we have big overall numbers, we like to break those down into our trends so that we can study and track what's happening to guide our future decisions. You can see that our digital circulation increase was tremendous, which is different from last year when we did our breakdown. Physical and digital circulation was about the same in increase, but our digital is really exploding. So we want to focus on making sure those services are available in abundance to our citizens. You can see that our digital services include ebooks, audiobooks, music, movies, TV, comics, TV series. We can access those digital services through Hoopla or Overdrive, also known as Libby. We have lots of numbers that kind of come out at the end of each year. I think that for me, the most telling is that one in the middle, that during the year, there are 59,468 visitors to the library. And you got to remember the library's closed on Sundays and on all holidays, and only half open 4 hours on Saturdays. So our libraries are getting lots of traffic and lots of visits. Our staff works very hard to procure new materials. We had 6,350 items added. There's our budget. That is all state aid that comes from the state, and that is only for the purchase of materials, and that's from the state. And our patron, we're very patron-focused. There were 548 items that were purchased only because a patron specifically requested that item. So I think that it shows that our staff is serving our patrons any way that they can. We always like to try to keep our library a safe and comfortable and inviting place to come. And so this year, in enhancing our buildings, we had focused on the outside a little bit, and we've had a lot of good response. Patrons have said how much they enjoy coming and spending time outside of the library as well as inside the library. Our friends of the library, we have a friends group at Madison Heights and at Amherst, and they do help fund some of the smaller projects. The water fountain was funded, and we don't have a picture yet, but the car accessible book drop was also funded. We're doing a big project at the Madison Heights Library where we're refurbishing all the bathrooms. That building was built many, many years ago, and it was time for a bathroom refresh. Biggest project and probably the most noticeable was our front steps. They were gone for a long time, but now that they are back, we've had patrons say how much they like the new steps better because it's easier to climb them. There's actually more steps, but the steps are shorter, so it's easier to climb the steps. So they look really great. You guys helped fund that project. We really appreciate your support in that project. Our staff works so hard to come up with new and unique and fun and creative programs. And the next two slides are going to kind of highlight just a few of those programs. Our summer reading numbers do come from June and July of '24, because we're talking about FY25. We had a great Yarn Crafters program that was new this year. It was 10 sessions, and 74 people attended over those 10 sessions. One of our super popular programs is our chess club. You don't have to know anything about chess. You can come and learn to play. You can play with others who already know. Great attendance there. And then for the first time, we had an author festival, and a lot of the authors were local authors from our area who have written and published books. We're really excited about the James River Association grant. They have received a grant of $25,000. They are going to help plan some green infrastructure at our libraries. This is modeled off of a program they did at the Richmond Public Libraries, and that's where those pictures come from, is the result of the finished product in Richmond. Next week, there's going to be community engagement events at the Amherst Public Library. You can come and do a ring barrel. There's also going to be a native plant workshop. There's sign-ups for that. They've been on Facebook and at the library as well. And I hope that you guys visit the library and that continue to support the library. And I know it's late, but if you have any questions, I'll try to answer those. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, and I apologize, I mispronounced your name at the beginning, Ms. Neblett.
That's okay.
But thank you for everything that you all are doing. I sit there and I see those kids on the mats and listening to story time. It's just great. You know, the older people, the white-haired people, listening to, you know, it's just great. The library meets so many needs. Thank you. Board members?
No, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, we'll open the meeting back up to citizen comment. Anyone here wishing to speak? Seeing and hearing none, we will close citizen comment, move on to matters from the board. Mr. Wade?
Nothing tonight, ma'am.
Mr. Adams?
Nothing.
Mr. Martin?
No, ma'am.
I don't have anything either. All right, board members, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Wade. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Meeting's adjourned.